It's quite a sight to see your grandparents running as if they're part of the Indian Olympic contingent. Now, I imagine that for most of you, this is a rare occurrence. However, for me, this is a daily affair. You see, growing up in India, I would go visit my grandparents in Delhi every summer, where we would get running water for about 2 hours every day. The house would go into an absolute frenzy as soon as my grandma would hear the sound of the water rushing out of the tap. She would sprint across the house to finish as many chores as she could, while my granddad raced to the opposite corner to fill up buckets upon buckets of water. The same routine played out daily, but there was still an unjarring uncertainty to it. Sometimes we didn't get water for days on end. This summer, I went back to my grandparents' house after 3 years. Obviously, the routine still played out. However, there was one difference. Now, it's worse. Intrigued by this disparity between Europe, where I live now, and India, where I grew up, I started reading about the water supply and realized how widespread the problem really is. The whole system is flawed, and this affects not only me and my family, but millions of people in India and billions across the world. The lack of water security, defined as the ability of a population to have access to safe water in sufficient quantity in a sustainable manner, is too often ignored by the Western world. But it is essential for the prosperity of people and countries. It is estimated that 350 million people were adversely affected, as India was hit with severe droughts and a record breaking heat wave. Delhi had transformed from a vibrant, colorful city I knew and loved into a ghost town. I remember walking through the sweltering heat and looking at the faces of mothers and children in poorer households. Compared with the agony they faced, the 2 hours of water my grandparents got felt like a privilege. The problem is very real. Sure, you keep reading about how kids in Africa are dying due to dirty water and how countries like India are being consumed by famines. But behind those massive blocks of text and statistics, there are real people, children, mothers, and families. I learned this in one especially muggy evening. Drenched in sweat after going for a run, I sat down next to an old lady to rest. She graciously offered me some water. As I drank it, I started talking to her and could immediately tell that she wasn't from Delhi. She belonged to Tikamgarh, a village in central India. Her family had recently moved to Delhi. Their ancestral land had become infertile due to years of drought. They had borrowed money from loan sharks to revive their land, but had been unable to pay them back due to consecutive crop failures. The debt had become so great that they decided to move to Delhi, selling off their land. She started crying as she told me how her eldest son hung himself under this immense burden. I hugged her and tried consoling her, but to no avail. Here she was, in an alien environment, burdened with the death of her eldest son, trying to make ends meet. The water crisis had ripped her life apart. And what's worse is the fact that she's not alone. The World Economic Forum states that the global water crisis is the number one threat we face. In fact, 25% of the human population already suffers from it. In a decade, this number will have risen to 66%. That's 2 out of every 3 people. Most Europeans, however, are shielded from this problem. Having lived abroad, I get it. Sitting in this comfy room with drinking water available at the nearest faucet, it might seem that the problem doesn't exist. But water security is not an issue that only affects parts of the developing world. Every continent in the world now suffers from it. In fact, 1 in 5 people in Europe live in a country that is water stressed, including Italy. And this situation is only getting worse as each year passes. It is thus essential to break this illusion of normality. Now, our future might seem bleak, but the very nature of most global crises is the solution. The UN states that there is enough fresh water on the planet, but too much of it is wasted, polluted, and unsustainably managed. Unsurprisingly, this is the case in Delhi as well. Citizens in Delhi are supplied more water per capita than their counterparts in Amsterdam. However, the problem is that more than 50% of Delhi's water supply is wasted. The current model fails to solve the problem in the long term. Irreversible socioeconomic damage caused due to large-scale construction of dams, conduits, and embankments, coupled with habitual design, operation, and construction errors, are the results of a global approach to a local problem. This approach has been proven time and again to be disastrous in tackling water supply issues. This has been seen and is still seen in the ex-USSR, Kenya, Namibia, South Africa, India, China, and even the United States of America. What we need to solve the current crisis is the pursuit of self-sufficiency, a local solution to a global problem. Voluntary participation is the only viable solution. When citizens work together at progressively higher levels, the threat of water scarcity evaporates. Citizens can start at the domestic level by guaranteeing water security in their homes, schools, and offices. In fact, just by fixing leaking faucets, using reduced volume toilets, and low-flow showers, a household can save to 130,000 liters of water annually. That's enough for 2 years of consumption. California's Water Action Plan can be used as an exemplar. Multiple drives at the local level successfully influenced individuals to change their water consumption habits. Communities around the globe can learn from this. Efforts to refit and repair need to be incentivized. Additionally, self-sufficiency needs to be supported. This self-sufficiency needs to be carried on to entire communities. Each and every citizen is essentially the moving part because we have a direct impact on our community's water security. A prime example of this is the Indian village of Manyali. Manyali is infamous for its sky-high farmer suicide rates, or now it was. In 2012, Santosh Gawale, a resident of Manyali, decided to take the abysmal situation into his own hands. He managed to educate the villagers on water security and created an efficient system of water management. In 4 short years, the village has solved its own problems so well that it is now exporting similar technology to nearby afflicted areas. Communities around the globe can learn from Manyali. Initiatives to educate the public and providing volunteering options are essential. Rainwater harvesting and wastewater recycling should be a central aspect of our governments. Additionally, there needs to be a push for stricter industrial guidelines and conservationist agricultural practices. Finally comes the national level. Israel's example of successfully overcoming an arid climate and scarce natural reserves to provide water to all can be used as an example. Israel successfully created the world's largest desalination plant. It has the most water-efficient agricultural industry. It also fully recycles its wastewater. All of this is possible because Israel invests in human resources, science, and technology, and it is paid back in terms of water security. We need to emulate Israel. Governments need to incentivize and provide money to research and development in this specific field. Additionally, it is our duty as citizens to vote in governments that have water security as an essential point in their national policy. Thus, if we are to solve this problem, we need to work together at progressively higher levels, starting at our homes, move on to our communities, and finally to our nations. There needs to be change, and there can only be true change when each and every one of us alters their water consumption habits for the better. Remember, if we don't start now, your grandchildren will end up like my grandparents, scurrying around for a precious few buckets of water. Thank you.